Gracie Jiu Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 143 of the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today, my guest will be Ray Griffin, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but I just wanted to start off by taking a moment and talking about this past year and the coming year, the one that's just starting. So I didn't do an end of the year segment this year, just had way too much going on, lots of projects. So we didn't officially say goodbye to the year through the podcast, but it's certainly been one crazy year for sure. And unlike a lot of people I hear, I had a great year. I accomplished a lot, I did a lot, I achieved a lot of things, and certainly not bragging about that. I'm just saying that, no matter what the circumstances, you can certainly charge forward and live your life and live it well. Now, I'm certainly not discounting or diminishing any of the trials and challenges that people have had this past year. I know a lot of people have had some serious things happen in their lives. Some people have lost businesses. Some people have had certainly some health concerns. And again, I'm not playing down or minimizing any challenges that anybody's gone through. I just think for a great majority of us, it boils down to mindset. Mindset is everything, and it literally can determine how we see or view the situation we're in and how we process it and what our reality is because of that. Whatever we focus on consistently becomes our reality. And if you focus on just all the negative that's going on out there, then that'll be your reality. But if you focus on all the things to be grateful for and all the opportunity that's still going on right now today, then that will be your reality. So I'm excited about going into this new year. As I started off the last year by stating I am slowing down on the frequency and amount of episodes I'm doing. I'm probably going to do about one a month instead of one every 2 weeks like I did for going on 8 years now. So can't believe it. Time really flies. So I'm excited about this year. I think it's going to be one of the best years ever. And I invite you to all look at this year as, an opportunity to grow, develop, learn, and conquer. So live life with passion and move forward. Okay, enough of my talking. Ray Griffin is the owner and head instructor of Griffin Academy. And I really enjoyed the conversation with Ray. He's a very passionate person, passionate about jiu-jitsu, about family, and just a wonderful person to have a conversation with. In the episode, he talks about starting off in karate and his grandfather's advice, how UFC 1 affected him, starting and training jiu-jitsu with Pedro Sauer in Utah, his family and the parallels of jiu-jitsu and parenting, his academy, and how it really is a family affair, empowering women with situational awareness and self-defense, firearm safety, his group Griffin Tactical, working in real estate and how jiu-jitsu comes into play in this space, and his thoughts on getting older in jiu-jitsu and how jiu-jitsu is for everybody. So I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. After the episode, make sure you stick around just a little longer and catch the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without any further ado, let's talk to Ray. All right, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ray Griffin, owner and head instructor of Griffin Academy in Orem, Utah. So welcome, Ray. Thanks for being with me today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your patience. I know it's been a little bit of back and forth trying to get everything in place and aligned to do this. So I'm really glad we finally were able to pull it together, and I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Absolutely. You've had some amazing guests on, so it's an honor to be listed among some of them. I don't want to be necessarily shoulder to shoulder with some of them. They're definitely some giants, but I'm grateful to be at least within this similar crowd, I guess we could say.
Absolutely. And the pleasure and honor is mine for sure. I know you're passionate, Ray, about a lot of things, including empowering women and young women with jiu-jitsu, situational awareness, and even firearms education. We're gonna definitely get into all that, but let's just start off by taking you back. How did you get started in martial arts, and how did that lead you to eventually jiu-jitsu, and kind of what that journey's been like for you, Ray?
Sure. I think like a lot of kids that grew up in the 80s, if we weren't trying to figure out a way to get on a Nintendo at someone's house or scam our parents to get us one, we were probably acting out either Karate Kid or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, something like that. So I know for me, the first times, in fact, the original Karate Kid, I saw like maybe half of it at a friend's house. But then I remember my parents took us, or my mom took us one summer to see Karate Kid 2. And that was it. I was hooked. I was like, okay, I want to be a karate kid, a karate guy. I didn't understand even martial arts, any of that. I just knew like this was for me.
Absolutely.
Like, fighting made sense. As a kid growing up, I just like this was it. So that began a journey of, watching a show and just mimicking what I saw, sparring with my sisters, brothers, finding friends that just wanted to fight, and then, getting one of those little passes with like a week or two free at a, local martial arts school and trying that out. And then we would move and I would try something else out, and then would have friends that did it consistently. And so they would teach me stuff and kind of ate it up. Now, one thing that's kind of cool though with all of that is that what I learned a little bit later as a teenager was that my grandfather, my father's dad, was very much into the martial arts, and he was very into, I don't exactly remember which Japanese karate style, but he was into karate. And I learned later on that he would practice in the garage, and later on he gave me one of his original gis and his belts and a book that he had. And in fact, when I was about 18 and I was getting ready to kind of graduate high school and move on with life and serve a Mormon mission and then come back from there, he said to me, I remember he said, Raymond, I want you to make me a promise that I know you love karate, you love martial arts, but when you get home and when you get a job and things are stable, I want you to promise me that you'll find a martial art. He said, I don't care which one. Find a martial art that you're going to stick with, and I want you to learn it and make it part of your life. And I promised him, I remember that like it was yesterday. As an 18-year-old going, yeah, Grandpa, you got it. I will do that. I felt like that was an easy thing to promise. And sure enough, when I moved to Utah when I was 21, I had friends in high school. I wasn't one of those. I didn't have cable. We didn't ever see anything pay-per-view. We didn't really watch fights at home like boxing. But I remember having a friend who would tell me about the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He's like, oh my gosh, we watched this show. Miguel, this story I know resonates with probably everyone listening.
Absolutely.
That started jiu-jitsu. He's like, man, this guy, this Royce Gracie, he's like tiny. He just choked these guys out. He just totally, killed these guys. The way, that translated as a teenager, as a high school kid, was that basically these were death matches and all that. So, and, so at 21, I'm working here in Utah at Gold's Gym. And at the time, I was mentioning to someone, hey, I'm looking for a martial art. I don't know if it's going to be Aikido or karate or something. I got to find something cool, something that's really practical, And by this point, I was about 205 pounds. Had a roommate who played football for BYU, another one who played rugby for BYU. We were always wrestling around. I'm like, I need something. I didn't know that jiu-jitsu was what I needed. But one of the guys at the gym said, oh, there's a guy here locally. His name is Pedro Sauer, who fought a guy named Lance Batchelor, who was a Mr. Utah bodybuilder. Like, I knew who that was, working for Golds. He had kind of been around the scene. People knew who he was, except I think at the time he was still in prison for steroids or drugs or something else. But they told me the story about him, you know, being challenged by this guy Lance and him beating Lance. And he's like, yeah, and he's friends with that Royce Gracie guy too. I'm like, wait a minute. All of a sudden, all the connections, light bulbs started going. So I drove and I found the academy, and Pedro would laugh at this now, but I remember showing up. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning for class, and 11:10 students are there. Oh, Pedro will be here anytime. He's on Brazilian time. This is like 98, 99. And 11:20, here comes Pedro rolling up. Hey, my friends, how you guys doing? And he introduces himself. Get out. And he said, hey, how can I help you? I said, well, I'm looking, I understand you teach this Brazilian or Gracie Jiu Jitsu stuff. I heard you're friends with this Royce Gracie. Yeah, it's Gracie, a good friend of mine. We were just talking the other day. He said, why don't you come and try a class, my friend? I said, okay. So I went in, and that was it. I was hooked. It was one of those moments. There's a black belt under Pedro Sauer. A lot of guys know, named James Gardner. At the time, he was a brand new blue belt, and he was small. He was young. I'm thinking, here's like some skater-looking kid who's like 18. I'm gonna maul this guy. He gets on top of me. I'm like, really? And we all know how this goes. I was trying to throw him off of me, trying to move, and he just kept swimming and just kept moving and just fluid. I mean, literally like a bag of water. And I remember tapping because I got so tired and I couldn't breathe, and I was like panicking, like, wait a minute, I can't breathe. And Pedro, I remember hearing him say, oh, you did great, my friend, try again. And there was like only 4 or 5 of us in this afternoon class, I remember. And that was it. I left going, I don't know what just happened, but if this is what that, now Royce Gracie did, I'm in. Let's do it. And then someone showed me the video. One of the guys there said, hey, come over to my house. I got this VHS tape. And we watched the Pedro versus Lance fight. And I think I was in the academy every day.
Wow.
Morning, noon, night. I was there, especially the first year, every moment.
I bet.
And spent time with Pedro. Afterwards, we go to lunch and just learning from him. One guy said, hey, man, I had this satellite dish. I was able to get these VHS tapes of Royce's older brother Hickson fighting in Japan. And I've got these other, fights that were in Brazil, these Gracie challenge matches. I would pay like $10 for a VHS tape. And I was just, if I wasn't working, I was doing, studying, talking about something to do with jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
I was in. So that started the passion. In fact, my wife, before she's my wife, wasn't even my fiance, just at the time my girlfriend, she had come and she watched my blue belt test, and she even said, if there's any of these hias or these kias or these talk about chi or whatever, I'm out of here. I'm like, no, it's different. And she walked in, and what she tells people now is, oh my gosh, I watched this guy, Pedro Sauer, totally toy with my husband, who at the time was not small. I'm still not small, but just toying with him like playing with a kid. She's like, okay, if someone can do that to him, and there's this respect and this friendship and this camaraderie and this family aspect and the self-defense to it, she's like, sounds good, I can do this. So that's how it all started.
Let me just comment on a couple of those things, Ray, because it's very interesting. I really love hearing people's first exposure, and a lot of them are the same. First time, first experience, bam, it's hooked. I mean, I got to do this. And then the others, like, man, I really got mauled. I don't know if I want to do this. And it takes a few times or whatever. But more often than not, it's kind of like you have some experience by someone you think you're going to run through, right? And they just school you with the technique. And it's just so enlightening. And it just really is exciting. So I like hearing that. Also, I really enjoy hearing from people that were way out in Utah back in the day, back when Pedro was really establishing himself, where it really had to be a proving ground where he had to test himself every day with people coming and challenging him, right? So did you get to see some of that?
Well, yes, and we were part of it. So what would happen is, I know that the guys have talked about this, but in Orem, it was the same thing in Salt Lake, but in Orem, we had BYU, I still have. BYU, Brigham Young University, is really close. At the time, they still had their wrestling program that was still run by Mark Schultz. who was a good friend of Pedro's, and there's a whole history there with Mark. But every once in a while, Mark would send a wrestler over that he needed to be either have humbled or someone who thought he was tough and wanted to fight a little bit, and he'd send someone over. Or sometimes these wrestlers would just show up because they kept hearing about these jiu-jitsu guys across town that thought they were tougher or could beat up or choke out a wrestler. And so what would happen often is that someone would come in, either another martial artist or a wrestler or just someone off the street, and they'd, I'm interested in class, but I don't think, I'm kind of tough. I don't think this stuff would work. I mean, it's the classic Gracie challenge story. And sometimes Pedro would roll with them. Most of the time what he would do is he'd call someone out and have them, hey, you're here. Just come train with so-and-so. I remember a wrestler came in one time. He's like, Ray Griffin, come here. He comes like,
you do a nice impression of him, by the way.
It's funny because every time I call him, I was just talking to him last week on the phone, the same thing. Answer the phone. He's like, Ray Griffin, my friend, how you doing? I don't know. You've been around Pedro so long that you can get the accent, and you just, I don't know. It's just become family. But I remember he said, hey, come here. I want you to train with this guy. And what he would do is, if the guy was cool, he'd just tell you to train with him. And then if the guy was or gal, usually guy, if it was kind of a jerk, Pedro would kind of do that Brazilian snap the fingers thing that I still can't do after 20-something years.
Same.
But he'd kind of, you know what I mean? But you'd look at him, and he'd give you that, and that meant put the paint on. And so I remember this guy, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a white belt. This wrestler is a monster. And went to pass my guard, and without even thinking, boom, triangle choke. The guy tapped, and he almost went out. I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, this worked. But it happened all the time. Guys would come in, not just wrestlers, but we just had all kinds of martial artists would come in, or just again, guys that were tough. And there were a lot of them that came in that just wanted to learn and wanted to experience it. And it was really cool to watch that Pedro would normally have someone else roll with them because he could kind of quickly assess, okay, this person has a clue or has no clue. But what I realized it also did was he didn't need to always roll with these people or fight them or anything because he'd proven himself for years.
Yes.
I kind of see myself as the second generation or second wave. You have some of your original guys that started training, in the very, very beginning when he came to Utah, Eddie Edmonds and, I'm trying to, Wilbur Knowles, Alan Hopkins. Yeah, some of these guys, Rob Hanley came in. There's a bunch of these other guys that were around in the beginning. And then I kind of came, later in the 90s. Keith Owen was obviously one of the earlier ones as well. So a lot of those guys were now the ones that were doing the fighting and doing the training. And it just, every time, it worked. But then we got that personal time with him. I think at the time, Pedro had just received his 5th degree black belt when I started training with him. But it was not uncommon to be rolling, and he just was the next one in line you'd roll with. And
so cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully answered your question because I'm like totally in my mind going back and just remembering.
I bet. It's easy to go back there, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me ask you this, or let me comment on this. It seems very cool that even though in the midst of all that, where testing had to be taking place at time, the proving ground, so to speak, and when it needed, it would be done. But at the same time, as you described it a few minutes ago, it seemed like a very family atmosphere of his academy, which is really kind of cool that he could balance all that,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and by family as well. I don't think he does this quite the same way anymore. I don't think Anne would allow it the same way. But I just remember after class would go from like 11 to 1, and we'd still be rolling until about 1:30 or so. And then afterwards, if there's only one or two of us, sometimes like, let's go to lunch. Sometimes he'd just say, hey, come on over to the house. Let's have some lunch and talk. And we'd be talking for 2 or 3 hours.
Nice.
And just literally some of the stories that he tells now, people are like, oh my gosh, can you believe that? I'm like, yeah, I heard that 20-something years ago. And I just kind of laugh. I'm like, yeah, the stories he was telling, they were still very new, a lot of them, that would happen. And so learning from him and seeing that, or I'd ask about, as the years went on, I'd ask about somebody or a Brazilian or something else. It's like, oh yeah, when so-and-so and I trained, or I met so-and-so, or I don't know who Pedro doesn't know. and who hasn't met him, which is I've learned over the years. But yeah, those are some, and the family aspect, you're exactly right. That's what made it easy for my now wife
Yes.
to see there's value in this. And then to also see, as my kids came along, I see, so as a blue belt, my wife and I got married. We moved out back east, back where my parents were living. I started teaching as an affiliate and at a karate school, which what Pedro told me was that just be ready that wherever you go, most likely people will want to put jiu-jitsu to the test. And sure enough, within the first time arriving to a karate school, the guy was really nice, but he said, listen, if you're going to teach here or teach at least in the evening, or sometimes teach my students some of this, Gracie Jiu Jitsu, you're going to need to prove to them. And I've got some tough fighters in here. And these were Kyokushinkai karate guys, which they're used to hitting pretty hard and kicking pretty hard. But sure enough, I was talking to someone on Instagram about this. It plays out just like Hoya and Gracie narrates on the Gracie in Action videos. It starts with you're at the distance, you literally manage that distance, you close the distance, achieve the clinch, take the fight to the ground, whether you're on your back or they're on their back, you get the dominant body position, and then you put on a submission, and then depending upon how they were acting leading up to this, you apply some pain, or you just gently choke or gently have the arm and negotiate as you're talking to them. And over and over and over. I remember he said, okay, now you're going to spar with my black belts. Then you're going to spar with me. And the black belts would start sparring like, man, I'm getting nailed, kicked and punched. As soon as he said, okay, now you can do anything you want. Boom, distance, double leg, on top, choking them out. I'm like, this really is like that easy. As Professor always said, it's like 2 loaded 45s on your hip. It's not a fair fight.
Right.
And it was true over and over. And then as my kids were being raised in this, it never stopped being a family thing. He came out for the seminar and stayed in our house, and he played with my daughter at the time, who was a year old, maybe more than he talked to me, it seemed like. And he's, I now have 8 kids, 7 daughters and a son, and Pedro has, I believe, 6 daughters. So there was always that connection he and I had as well, that it's different for us. We do it for ourselves, but more importantly, for our daughters as well, which we can talk about later. But the family aspect has been something that has always been important to us and to my wife and to my family.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about that. First of all, hats off. I consider you a very brave individual for having that many kids, even though, interesting enough, both my parents had like 10 brothers and sisters. So certainly had a lot of cousins and all that, but I only had one brother. I can't imagine as a parent, I have 2 kids, and I can't imagine having 7 girls and 1 boy. That's a handful. But what's your secret in, it sounds like you're very much family first, but what thoughts or advice do you have for parents out there?
So I think I could record a totally separate podcast on just parenting alone.
Sure.
And my wife would probably want to correct a lot of the things I would say in a totally separate podcast. But that's, you know what, though? First of all, it has to be a team effort. When she and I were first talking before we got married, we both wanted a lot of kids. I'm the oldest of 7, 4 sisters and 2 brothers. And she was the oldest of 4, but we both talked about wanting a big family. And I have lots of cousins. I have lots of family, tons of them. So that was not abnormal. So growing up in a big family was very normal for me. And part of it too is it happens one at a time. It's also where you put your priority. If your priority is in work, everything else will be a burden. Mm. If you put your priority just to jiu-jitsu, I know a lot of guys that jiu-jitsu that's all they do. And then the wife, the girlfriend, the whoever, significant other becomes kind of second fiddle. And then kids like, I don't know if I have time for that. Or if they have kids, they see the kids whenever. Yep. It doesn't work well. You have to make a decision. We decided early on for my wife and I, she and I number 1. And then we had the kids. And then it was one at a time, and you just start learning. And you literally, jiu-jitsu does become life when it comes to parenting, because there are times when you're on the defensive, sometimes you're on attacking, sometimes you're overwhelmed, but you got to figure out a way to escape the position. But more importantly, what I mean really is, as funny as that may sound and kind of visually see, really it's a matter of recognizing What's important in that moment? What are your boundaries? What are your rules? And it's exactly what we teach in the women in our women empowerment and self-defense courses. First of all, setting boundaries. It's critical early. Just like if I'm going to defend myself, if you're going to attack me and from a distance, stop, that's far enough. What do you need? I don't know you. I will defend myself. With kids, the kids thrive on boundaries. If you do this, if you choose to lie, if you choose to, not clean your room, if you choose to whatever it is, then this. We do the same thing. If you choose to punch, then I will defend myself. I will, close the distance. I will get a clinch, and I'll do these things. So it's very much the same kind of thing. If we recognize that, then it's just an effort. But it's also, if your kids are not a burden, then parenting is just a part of the process. Doesn't mean it's not stressful. I have teenage daughters. I have a teenage son. No one ever said it was going to be that nuts, especially when they turn 18. I've got a 20-year-old, 18-year-old. They work their way down. My oldest two are daughters. No one ever said at 18 it was going to be even that crazier than it was. Because it's simple. At about 14 years old, the brain falls out. Once we understood that philosophy, it's like the crazy white belt that you're rolling with. That it's just nuts. And okay, I understand that now. Now that I know that, it's not a big deal. Now I know how to navigate and keep my face away because they're probably going to scratch and they're probably going to do something you're not expecting. I know how to now navigate and manage this position. Now I get it. Now we with our kids, listen, guys, we know what's going to happen at 14, your brain falls out, but also we communicate with them.
I love that. My daughter I got started a lot later. So I have a 17-year-old son who's just turning 17, and my daughter is 13 and a half. So I totally get that part about the brain, and also appreciate the boundaries, because even though they don't act like they like the boundaries, they feel so much better and secure when they know they're there, right? And they can help them kind of make sense of things and navigate the world and all that. But applying that to self-defense, I like the thought of kind of the stages of it, right? So if you're walking down a road, the first thing shouldn't be, bam. Now there may be those rare times when someone just jumps you. That's one thing. But usually there's indicators, right? You're not putting yourself in a position to someone can just jump out of the bushes. So I'm sure you can talk a lot more about this, but the situational awareness, and when is someone looking, maybe someone's across the street, but it's not looking right and they're starting to come forward. And then, at some point you've got to escalate it to verbal boundaries and et cetera. So you can talk a little bit more about that or finish with the parenting and go to that if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, and they're, like you said, they're definitely related. It's the difference between being reactive as a person, or if you're talking parenting as a parent, or being proactive. If you're proactive, so think about jiu-jitsu, think about self-defense. What did most of us do, especially now it's easy, but back in the day, we were grasping for any VHS tape and then DVDs we can find. I got lucky. I found a VHS tape version at a local store called Media Play, like a Best Buy now, that used to have CDs and DVDs and all kinds of. They had a copy of Choke. I have no idea why or how. It was like divinely placed there, and I bought it, and it was like $28 or whatever, something crazy amount. I bought that. I remember watching Choke almost till I burned out that VHS tape.
I bet.
But just studying, right? Because we didn't have much. And then I had those VHS tapes I bought. And when DVDs came out, there was like nothing, and there was no instructional videos. And then little by little, the internet, you start to see a little bit, but they were grainy. Now it's, how do I learn? How do I proactively go out and learn about jiu-jitsu? It's everywhere. In fact, you almost have to filter. In fact, students ask me, what should I go and research? Stop. Don't yet. Let me step you through it. Otherwise, you will end up down rabbit holes. Absolutely. You'll become a YouTube black belt, and you'll completely miss the mark. And that's YouTube black belt is a term I like, and I'll talk about that later why. But being proactive rather than being reactive. You have to be, because over and over, and it's been proven this way, you take kids that are in these homes that have struggled with parents like totally hands off, and what ends up happening is the parents are like, oh, they'll figure it out. Yeah, they'll figure it out, but it's probably not going to end well, or it's probably going to be really painful. Whereas the boundaries up front, because here's the thing, you're not your kid's friend. That's a harsh reality for a lot of people to realize, but you're not there to be your friend. You're there to be their father or their mother. You're there to be a parent. You can be friends later on in life once they've experienced a lot of what you've experienced, but initially, friends don't discipline other friends. but a parent has to discipline a child and has to set those boundaries. Now, good friends in time learn how to set boundaries so that friends know how to interact positively, and those are healthy relationships. On the self-defense side, and some of the things we talk to women about is exactly that, is understanding those boundaries. Now, I'm grateful. My wife she's a survivor. She's a survivor of child physical abuse, sexual abuse, child pornography, just horrific background growing up through father, mother, uncle, just, anything you can think of and then some happened to her. But she broke the cycle. She broke the chain. She is the definition of an empowered woman. And when she talks to these women, it is silent because she's talking from a place of knowledge and understanding and an empowerment. It's not a woe is me sob story. Instead, is it, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about being aware. First of all, trust in your gut. If it seems weird, it is weird. And, some of these things that no one can take from you. And once you set these boundaries of, no, you may not talk to me like that. This is a bad situation. No, I'm not going to go on this date with you. You don't have to, I'm not going to respond to these text messages, whatever the situation, all the way down to, you're at the store, you're at church. It doesn't matter where you are. You're at a family function. It does not matter where you are. Those basic things of boundaries. Eye contact, she's really, really big on. And, that eye contact tells you, I see you. And I see that you see me, but you also know that I see you. Therefore, I am not going to be an easy victim. And that's the way she talks. And the women, you can see they straighten up a little bit, the shoulders back, the heads lift up. She talks to them first. And then when we stand up, and then when they first learn, first of all, these verbal boundaries, and then someone comes close, grabs a wrist and starts to pull. And they learn, that combat base. When they brace that leg forward and they lean back, they're like, wait a minute. And then I'll come over. I weigh about, I'd like to say I weigh about 230, but I'm not. I'm about 250, 255. I'm not a small person, 6'1". When I grab a hold of their wrist, first of all, usually my hand wraps around their wrist. And then I start to pull, and then they anchor themselves. When they realize I am actually pulling with everything I've got, and they're not moving, this light bulb clicks.
Oh, yeah.
They now understand what it means to set a boundary, to enforce a boundary, and what it means to now in that moment be empowered. And then the wrist escapes. And then side hugs is one of my favorite, because there's this weird thing in society now where, okay, front hug may be a little personal. So the side hug is totally fine. It comes out of, like you said, sometimes we see things coming, but sometimes it comes out of nowhere. Someone walks up next to him and just puts that side hug, hey, how's it going? And here locally in Utah, we talk about often like at church. It's just that the person who comes up, the adult, it doesn't matter who it is, or the bigger kid, and just, hey, puts their arm around, trying to be in quotes affectionate, but yet not too personal.
Sure.
Like, no, that is personal. That is your personal space. But that's simply forming a frame and driving that frame with a good base. Women are astounded. Women are like, wait a minute, I can do this.
So much
and
power.
Then oh, absolutely. And then what's great is that, moving to the family thing, it's not just my wife and I that teach it. My assistant instructor for the self-defense is either my 20-year-old daughter, my 18-year-old daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, now my 12-year-old daughter, my 11-year-old daughter, and I even sometimes will bring in my 9-year-old and the 6-year-old, just to show that these little kids can do this. But when they see my daughters, who I outweigh by over 100 pounds, my 14-year-old especially, when she does, and she doesn't talk as much as the other ones, but when I grab a hold of her or start pushing her and she does this, the eyes light up and they realize, oh my gosh. And it's interesting because what women are finding the feedback we've received is, wait a minute, not only is this, sometimes they'll say harsh meaning hard to hear, like, I can set these boundaries now with my husband, that the way he talks to me is not acceptable. Or I've got teenage kids that I realized I've let them run all over me. Now I realize I can set these boundaries and it's okay. And so we don't necessarily turn these into parenting seminars, but the idea that these boundaries are everywhere.
Yes. And the application goes all over, right? Like the boundaries, I'm astounded. So often when I've talked to people, they mistake boundaries for, well, that's not polite, or that would be rude. And you're like, no, it's not. So that part of the education has to be there for so many before you even move on to, more of the physical things and things like that. But man, you sounds like you're doing a tremendous job, especially with all those daughters helping you out. That's amazing. I don't want to go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say the thing that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up as well. My wife, will say often to anyone that she talks to when people ask her about parenting, and they assume because we have 8 kids that we've figured it out. And you know, I don't think I'm necessarily a black belt father or a black belt, parent, but I'm working on it. But I feel like I'm definitely beyond blue or purple belt because I've had a lot of experience and we figure some things out. Doesn't mean we know everything. But one thing my wife is big on is saying is that, what is it worth? What is your virtue? What are you worth? If you're worth defending, then you need to be willing to offend the world.
Wow.
What is your child worth? Are they worth protecting and defending? And is it worth having them grow up to become a functional, human that's useful to the world and to others and to themselves, to their spouses eventually, and to their own children? Then if so, you need to be willing to offend them by your boundaries, because that's the only way they're going to learn and really understand cause and effect, because the world does not care. She says this to my kids all the time. When you get out into the world, you're going to learn no one cares about you. She's like, I'm not trying to be rude. It's a harsh reality, but no one actually cares. Meaning your boss doesn't, if you have a boss, he doesn't care if you're late. He just wants the job done. All these situations, your teacher in school, high school is different. When you get to college, they don't care.
Right.
Oh, you didn't show up. You didn't turn this assignment in? 0. Like, they don't care. And it's not that they don't care about you personally if they get to know you. It's just life. They're not sitting there up at night. Oh, that one student I gave a 0 to, I hope they're okay. That's not life. So when you learn that you should be willing to offend the world, protect yourself from the world for yourself and for your children, that changes something. There's a level of empowerment, and it is a freeing feeling you receive that you realize, okay, I can do this. It's like the whole women with self-defense. And I love the way Eve Gracie has talked about this specifically, that, what makes, the Gracie Women Empowered, what makes empowerment. I mean, basically what's great is that all the stuff that they teach, just about everything that they've done. I remember learning from Pedro years ago, and I'll bounce something off him. He's like, oh yeah, my friend, do this. For women, it's easier, do this. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's on the Women Empowered TV. Oh, okay. It's Gracie Jiu Jitsu. It's just applied in this particular way. But one of the things Eve would talk about, still does, is just this idea that a woman, think about trying to eye gouge or rip someone's, eyes, or these scratching and these striking things. Like, there's no way. There are some women who are very strong and very tough, but it's few and far between compared to the women who are nurturers, who can use leverage and can use frames and body mechanics, but probably aren't going to be the ones striking to fight for their life least effectively. So understanding that you're willing to defend yourself and protect yourself or your children from the world and set those boundaries. Again, I mean, we could keep going on about this over and over for hours, but It's, there's parenting or self-defense, empowerment,
And the parallels.
It's all related.
It is, for sure. 2 things before we kind of move on from family and kind of those parallels. You have something called Black Belt Husband, I believe. So I wanted to hear a little bit about that, as well as I wanted to make sure we mentioned you have a son who's a wrestler, correct?
Yes. Right. Yeah. So okay. There actually is an Instagram page called Black Belt Husbands. It's not mine. Whoever it is, I don't know him personally yet. I love it though, because it's very much about kind of right along the lines of things my wife and I talk about. I've learned so much from her. She's the one to ever, like, from a wife perspective of a jiu-jitsu black belt and who teaches women empowerment. She'd be awesome ever to talk to. But it's all about how are you showing up. Being a black belt in jiu-jitsu means not only a ton of stuff, but it's the application that's way more important than what you know. Of how you apply it and how you use the leverage and use it properly so that it's applied properly with the right, right timing, the right mechanics. So that's not mine, but I like to say that I am a black belt husband or a black belt father, because that to me doesn't mean I'm amazing. What I see that as, just the same as if people ask and I say, yeah, I'm a Gracie Jiu Jitsu black belt under Master Pedro Sauer, that to me is not bragging rights. Instead, that's a huge responsibility. A huge responsibility to pass on Elio Gracie's legacy in his jiu-jitsu, to pass on the things that I have learned, and as a martial artist, as a jiu-jitsu practitioner and instructor, to pass those on. But then when I think as a husband and as a father, just because I've had the experience and time to learn means I need to pass these on, because my daughters are going to marry young men that I want to be black belt young men. My son's going to marry a woman that's going to be, I want her to be a black belt wife. All of those, meaning that amount of experience, that amount of time learning and developing and understanding how to apply those proper mechanics, if you will, of marriage principles and being a good parent and a good father and all that. So hopefully that answers that. And then, so what's really cool is I can't talk enough about my son. His name is Ray as well. He's number 3. I'm a junior. He's the 3rd. And he is like 6 foot, 235, almost 240 pounds. He's a heavyweight wrestler. What's crazy is this whole life he's been in jiu-jitsu, and just kind of, I learned from my first kid that I could not force jiu-jitsu on them. But my wife, in time, it was like, okay, guys, we do this as a family. This is what we do. You can do, soccer and piano and anything else you want to do, or we're going to have you do. But jiu-jitsu is one of the things we will do because that's important to us as a family. And then when we start teaching, you all help learn how to teach, and you all be instructors because, often one of the best ways to learn something is to be an instructor. But my son, over the years, developed, and he got pretty good, and he's good at jiu-jitsu, and we would have a lot of fun. And then he wanted to wrestle. And we thought about it just as a way to kind of, get him outside of our family dynamic and get him with other coaches, because we certainly recognize, and one of the things I know that draws people to jiu-jitsu academies is you have instructors, you have other students, other parents, you have a village that's a like-minded village that's helping raise him. When you have especially a son, having sons, when it says a village to raise a child, be careful the village you pick, and be careful who the village elders are, and be careful who your neighbors are in that village. So with the wrestling community here in Utah, the high school, thankfully, is a really, really good high school, great coaches. And we saw, okay, these guys are going to push him. In fact, after the first few practices his freshman year, he started, as a freshman wrestling. A lot of these kids have been wrestling their whole lives. He would come back and say, oh my gosh, Coach so-and-so said exactly, Mommy, what you say to me. It's like, I'm hearing you talk. She said, good, you need great. It. But what's funny though is his freshman year, he got destroyed. Oh my gosh. And in fact, he told us later, like into his sophomore year, he's like, I don't want to say anything, but I really wanted to quit. And I would kind of leave practice crying because the guys were mean or they were tough. He said, what I realize is they're just being wrestlers, and it's tougher. It's a harder combat sport physically as far as the actual impact than jiu-jitsu is. We're much more gentle, right, in many ways. I'm like, well, you weren't trained jiu-jitsu in the 90s, man, early 2000s, when it felt like a death match. Like my first gi has blood all over it. It's not the same, but that's a different story. But, and but I would watch him in these tournaments and his meets, and someone would double leg and he'd just go right into the guard, and he'd get pinned so fast. Or these things would happen, and he was just a fish out of water. But then came his sophomore year. He started to grow physically, and it was just awesome. Now he's a junior, and he's ranked, I think, top 5 in the state. And what's been really fun to watch is that other coaches now recognize, oh, watch out for this Ray Griffin kid.
Wow.
Because what he'll do is he's now mixed the jiu-jitsu with the wrestling. And so he's got the wrestling takedowns and the pressure, but he uses his hip pressure with jiu-jitsu. The way, rather than going flat like a lot of guys, he'll use the toes, like keeping his toes alive, the way Professor Sauer always said, and I would teach him. And so his head and arm, which turn into chokes now, his head and arm pins, or when he'll mount, he'll straight up hips and hands, hold the head, hook the legs, back and forth as the guy's trying to move, and he'll pin him in the mount. People are like, what the heck are you doing? In fact, one coach was like, no, Ray, you need to do this. I said, don't listen to him. Don't listen to that particular thing because he doesn't understand what you're doing. In fact, I don't know if you saw the video, so I get really fired up about this. One kid had him like in a rear clinch, yes, but the kid was kind of lazy about it. And he just literally dropped the hands to the ground, just like if someone has you in a rear bear hug under the arms, yep, reached back underneath, realized, oh, the leg is there, pulled the leg, sat back and swept the kid and got on top of the kid. And he looked over at me with a smirk. It's pretty, and he's like, it was there. In fact, he tried it again, awesome, I think, but the kid had moved butt. And one of the coaches like, that wouldn't, well, one of the kids like, there's no way that works. And then he started showing him. And anyway, it's a lot of fun to watch. He's at a tournament right now, and it's his junior year. And so now he's like on the mat now as a blue belt. In fact, he was one of those where at 15 and a half, I was testing him with his sisters because he was, hours-wise, hundreds of hours on the mat. He was ready. He knew the technique. And when I talked to Pedro Sauer. I said, he's ready to test. My one daughter's going to be leaving for college, so I'm going to test her for blue belt and test him at the same time. And he just said, that's totally fine. Just hold the blue belt until he's 16. So I tied it on him, just saying, okay, you've earned it, but you won't start wearing it until you're 16. And I'll tell you what, as a 16-year-old, he's still 16 and a half now. He's a monster.
Wow.
I have to tame him back with a lot of my adults that come in just because he is so dominant. And I have to tell him, dude, you can't put that kind of pressure. I know you do in wrestling practice, but be really careful.
He's a beast, man.
They have no idea what that pressure feels like. I remember it as a white belt, but when now, to build a good, jiu-jitsu school, you got to be careful. You can't have everyone in a blender every day, as you know, they're going to quit. And I'm very careful how I structure white belts, when they start positionally rolling and kind of ease themselves into sparring over time. But anyway, so I could talk about him and all of them. I mean, my daughter's in the National Guard in basic training, similar thing. I told her, don't say a word. Just like my experience of basic training when I was 32, don't say a word about your jiu-jitsu, because she went in as a blue belt. I said, just keep your mouth shut. They start teaching combatives. And if you need to, go ahead and start, have a good time. Well, same thing. She just started dominating to the point where in the final, for like the battalion championships in boot camp, they put her against this. She said, Daddy, she was this big CrossFit girl. But it was just like you said. She threw me to the ground, jumped on top, and I could feel her like trying so hard to choke, but I was just tucking my chin. And she said I could feel her trying so hard, and I was just kind of doing little bumps in there. She was holding on. And then it was like, boom, there it is. Upa, or trap and roll. She said, I passed her guard. I got on top. He said, and then I armbarred her to the point where the drill sergeant realized there was a little bit of bad blood because this girl was kind of disrespectful to a lot of the females. Like the drill sergeant jumped in because as soon as he saw her spin around for the armbar from the mount, he knew what was coming next. And like he grabbed a hold of her just as she was starting to extend her hips. And she's like, Daddy, I'm glad he did, because I was really mad at her because how disrespectful she was to me and to other girls, and how rude she was the entire almost 2 months. I'm like, I'm glad you didn't, because that would have not been good. And it wouldn't have been a good example, but I get it.
Sure.
I get it every once in a while. But anyway, so.
Great stories, man. I can tell you're just totally passionate about your family. So I really enjoy hearing that. And you mentioned about running an academy. So let's go ahead and talk about your new academy. What I want to ask you before you get too far into it, your logo, that symbol, what is that creature? Because it looks like something I've seen before, but I'm not sure if it's that or something else. So what is that?
So you're looking at my Griffin Tactical logo.
Yes. I'm sorry. That should have been more
you're
specific.
Good. So I have two things. So Griffin Tactical is kind of the if you will, in parent company, in quotes. It's kind of the thing that I use because I've worked with 511 store here locally and taught situational awareness classes and intro to self-defense and everyday carry, survival, lighting fires in the wilderness type classes. And then I also teach straight up situational awareness classes, first aid, emergency shelter, everyday carry, go bags, bug out bags, all of that, as well as self-defense, and then law enforcement and military combatives. And so Griffin Tactical just made it easier to kind of run everything. I do a course that actually, it's a lot of fun. It's self-defense with a firearm. So if you carry concealed, if you're in a state where you can, how do you defend yourself when you're carrying, and when do you use your firearm? Because that can be a very confusing thing. If you're a jiu-jitsu person versus a no hands-on martial art training at all, that's a world that when you bring the two together can really cause confusion and problems. But all of that's through Griffin Tactical. Yeah, that's actually a griffin. That's the mythical creature Griffin is what that is.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
And then under that Griffin Tactical, I have Griffin Academy.
Gotcha.
Griffin Academy is my jiu-jitsu academy. So it's a, Gracie Jiu Jitsu, Pedro Sauer team, Griffin Academy. And that's the American and Brazilian flag with the armbar, guys doing the armbar silhouetted in the middle. That's what that logo is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us how that's going with the academy, and also, let's talk about that.
Sure. So I'm one of those that, as you can tell, I'm not passionate at all about jiu-jitsu or my family or anything.
Not at all.
But for me, the academy is something that it was they say not to say the 10-year overnight success, because I don't consider myself a success. I consider myself, as a guy named Ryan Mickler with Order of Man says, I went from being an expert hobbyist or advanced hobbyist to a novice professional. And that made all the difference. I love when he said that because that's what I feel like. But I started teaching jiu-jitsu back as a white belt. And it's always something I love to do. So I taught at a karate school when I lived back east in Pennsylvania, a couple nights a week to a bunch of kids. And some of them now who are, I think one or two of them now are black belts. Anyway, I started teaching there. And then we moved around, eventually moved back here to Utah. And eventually, my wife's like, okay, we need to start teaching again. And I started teaching out of my garage. Well, at that point, she's like, one day you're going to have a school, you better do a logo. Let's like, if you're going to start formalizing this, and we're talking like right before I joined the Army. So winter of 2009, I developed that logo. And I started teaching then, once we moved to Utah, I started teaching out of my garage. Had a few mats and just teaching my kids and teaching some neighbors. And it really, I guess all the best things started out of the garage, right? The Gracies, the Machados.
Absolutely.
Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. But it was, and a lot of guys would say, man, that's old school. Which for me was just, well, I have a full-time job. This isn't it. So I don't really have an option. So I started teaching there, and then eventually there's a guy here locally in Utah called Bobby Lawrence. Bobby is a long time, he's an Ed Parker Kempo karate student, yeah. And Bobby has a lot of schools. In fact, he and I got to know each other, and I started teaching him private lessons. I would say probably now almost 4 years ago. So about 2 or 3 mornings a week we do private lessons. And then a couple of years ago, and we had dabbled at looking at the combatives, and he had looked at maybe doing a CTC, but his whole program was so established, and he had already used, quotes, his ground karate, which was basically basic white belt techniques in some of his curriculum. As a student of jiu-jitsu, he loves Gracie Jiu Jitsu, loves Pedro Sauer. He actually trained with Pedro years and years ago. And so got his blue belt under Pedro a long time, like early 2000s. And so it was just kind of his hobby. He didn't play golf. He trains jiu-jitsu with me. And so over time, he said, you know what, maybe we could do a jiu-jitsu class here. I need to be careful. I don't want to run it into my whole karate stuff and mess things up. So we literally started with like twice a week, an hour at like 7:30 at night, 7 to 8:30. And then after a few months, finally he said, here's a back room here. I think I remember saying, hey, Bobby, can I use that back room? Or maybe we could teach back there. And then could I add a kids class right before that? And then little by little, what eventually happened was Griffin Academy was really kind of rose from, not say the ashes, but just rose out of the obscurity of the garage and started to become this little small school in the back of his karate school. And it was small. The mat space was, if we had 10 people on the mat, it was going to be crowded. And so that's where Griffin Academy really started to take off, and where I'd been an affiliate under Pedro Sauer for years, but it kind of been a little bit dormant because I wasn't officially teaching, but then resurrected that and had always stuck to Pedro Sauer curriculum, but really dedicated to teaching that, and started to advertise in social media, or at least putting it out on social media. A lot of word of mouth. And then the best thing I ever did was I put a little banner outside. He let me put a banner below his karate sign that said Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the Brazilian flag. And that brought in a lot of students. So a bunch of kids, some adults, some youth. And eventually, my wife came and was like, you need a space. So really, though Griffin Academy...
Your wife sounds really supportive, by the way.
You know what?
I love it.
She is amazing. Well, she's like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this. She's a Texan as well.
Yeah.
And so, and just being the woman that she is, she's a very, very forward-thinking, very observant, just dynamic, empowered woman. And she said, okay, if we're going to do this is going to be first and foremost for our family, for our kids. It needs to be done right so that they have to go through the curriculum and they advance. But we need a new space. And so we were able to build it up to where we had a bunch of kids in our kids' classes, a decent amount of adults, and to the point, okay, now it's time. So as of like January 1st, we had signed the lease in December for this new space. And like right now we're on temporary mats. My office still has, I'm looking around at it, and it has a bunch of boxes of all my Origin products that I sell, and the gis that I sell, and the Jocko Go drinks, all my books that I have, all my old jiu-jitsu books, and just everything's kind of piled in here because we've got a bunch of zebra mats coming in to fill the space, and we're going to be painting the walls, just really making it a nice academy. But I'm really excited because it is, here's the thing that I am most excited about. because I went into real estate about a year ago full time. I've been an agent since like April of 2020. But I went full time last year, and why that matters is because that gave me the flexibility and the time to actually devote to jiu-jitsu, add a morning class, move my kids' classes to like 4:30, which is way better after school for families rather than going home, getting established, and then coming back.
Right.
So they can do it not long after school, and then a youth class and adult classes, and have the standard beginner, advanced, and then an open rolling class. And my wife and I were teaching, as we were able, once every 2 or 3 months, these women empowerment courses, and I have a level 1 course, then a level 2, 3, and 4. It was just hard to schedule, but now we can do it. Now we have our own location, our own school, and Griffin Academy really is going to become the premier self-defense location. My goal is here in Utah and in the West, just because of how passionate we are. I don't know of anyone else that, as a family, my oldest daughter, she teaches the kids class with my other daughters as the assistant instructors. My son helps with the kids and with the youth class. And then I help teach the adult class, but sometimes my son and my daughter will help with those. But the fact that we do it together, my wife has been in here helping with kind of the layout and the design and just really behind the scenes. And in fact, next we're going to have an office in here because she's a fitness nutritionist and a personal trainer and a bunch of certifications. So this is going to be a great environment for her to do that. But Griffin Academy has been literally in the plan for over 10 years to all of a sudden, boom, here we go. Got a business partner that's come in with some great resources that is really going to turn this into a place where we can offer not just jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is great. There's a lot of jiu-jitsu schools, but this happens to also be mere blocks, like only a handful of blocks from Pedro's original academy here in Utah, and very close to where he used to live. In fact, I drive by all the time on the way to Costco by his house. And often I'll take a picture or I'll call him and tell him, hey, I was thinking about you, as I drive by. And to me, it means coming back. It's the rebirth of Pedro Sauer's Gracie Jiu Jitsu kind of. And yes, there's other guys. Jay Nazarbal down in Provo, there's guys all over. Mike Diaz is close by. There's a lot of them. But it's cool because it's here in Orem. And it's been a long time since there was, a Pedro Sauer Black Belt in Orem, really paying homage to Elio Gracie and to really keeping the purity. I appreciate fighting in MMA and all that. I'm not a fighter. And our school is self-defense. It is old school Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. We wear the white gis. We train. So that's what's exciting. And the fact that we have the space available where we can do now these women empowerment courses. We can do situational awareness courses. And you mentioned, and I'll bring up like the firearms education and safety courses. One of the things from the Army I've learned in going through the NRA with the Boy Scouts and stuff for years with certifications was that Utah has a lot of guns. A lot of people have guns throughout the U.S. That's great. But there's a lot of people who have them that don't know, one, either how to use them, or two, haven't used them very much, or more importantly, don't necessarily know how to use them in a self-defense situation, or just think, oh, I'll just shoot him in the knee. When they say that to me, I just kind of stare at them. They're like, I shouldn't? I can't do it? Okay. Which was the birth of why Griffin Tactical teaches firearms education and safety courses. First of all, let's talk to you about what they are. Let's talk about how to safely hold them and store them and load and unload and basic shooting mechanics. But also, let's talk about how and when and why. Yeah. We had a friend actually a few days ago. They just got a firearm. She's going through the training, but she didn't have her gun with her. And she had a guy, and she was in the middle median, getting ready to turn into a little burger place to get some lunch. And a guy coming at her in a truck. And she was terrified because his truck was barreling. So she honked, and the person swerved and then backed the truck up in the middle of this major road, right in front of her car, jumped out. She's like, this is the biggest guy I've ever seen in my life. Comes right up to my window, rolled down the window. She's like, I'm not rolling down the window. She was telling me, she's like, Ray, I was terrified. I was thinking, oh my gosh, why don't I have my gun? She was terrified, but she didn't know what to do. And so after I spent some time, and thankfully, she's like, I thought you didn't see me. You're just trying to honk. I just want to honk. Anyway, so she was able to finally get where she was trying to go, and he followed her for a little bit. Then she finally said, well, I've been recording this whole thing, and he took off. But she said, oh my gosh, what should I have done? I said, well, that's why we need to train and learn. Because like jiu-jitsu, like self-defense, if I'm swinging at you and you haven't actually practiced what to do if someone's punching, Your tournament jiu-jitsu does you nothing. You can deep half guard me all you want, but if we're having a realistic training situation and I'm elbowing you in the face right now because it is right there in perfect range,
right,
your points, your whatever you think you're getting are worthless. If you can't, and I remember spending time with House and Gracie years ago, and he was really pissed because he was talking with, it was when in the mid 2000s, you're starting to now see more black belts in the US. Before then, there was like 3, right, if you weren't a Gracie or one of them. But he was saying how annoyed he was getting or angry that people were saying Gracie Jiu Jitsu, but they couldn't get out of the headlock.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know Gracie Jiu Jitsu. Their jiu-jitsu is worthless to them. I was kind of laughing. I kind of get it because there's still, I mean, if you know jiu-jitsu, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be okay. But he's right in that over and over, I've seen guys, that's all they do.
Right.
And then they'll cram in quotes for the test, the self-defense, if that's what they're doing at their academy or in their association.
Yeah.
Or they don't actually necessarily even know the actual self-defense. And they're like, wait a minute, that's not, what are you doing? And so I get why Hickson got angry and has started the Jiu-Jitsu Global Federation, why Pedro Sauer has gone back, really to these roots of following Alo Gracie. I appreciate what Henner and Huron are doing. And these guys are trying to preserve the essence of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, it's self-defense. So that for me has been something that is first and foremost. And oh, by the way, it translates to, in this case, we were talking about firearms. So when we use those principles of safety and education, and then you develop these techniques and you practice over and over and over. So when the situation happens, when you recognize I am in fear for my life or the life of another. Okay, now you know how to act. Just like you're walking up close to me, hey, that's close enough, man. What's going on? Now you're in my boundary. Okay, back up. That's close enough. I'll defend myself. Whether I have to clinch or push you back a little bit more, whatever the situation dictates, I know how to act, and I'm not caught off guard. So that's where that comes from. The situational awareness is just another course because there's so much about that you can talk about. You're walking into the mall, you're walking into Costco, into Walmart, wherever it is, you're at church, and just feels weird. Like my wife always talks about, if you pull up to Walmart and there's lights flashing outside, there's a cop car pulled up, kind of not in the parking stall, but right up front, do you have to go in right then? Is there something you may be walking into?
Right.
Trust your gut. She said the same thing. She's like, more than once I've been walking in a mall and I'll just see someone. Well, she's been in Target and she saw someone and the person was like standing like right next to her. And she will turn like, hi, do I know you? Because you're standing really close. And people will be surprised that she'll do that. But immediately one of two things happen. If it's someone who's a good person, a good man will be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they'll just leave. You'll never see him again. They will do all they can to avoid you. If it's someone who is a predator, someone who doesn't mean, anything nice, then there's going to be this grooming aspect of, oh, no, it's okay. You misunderstood me. But she's more than once she's had it where she sees that person again, or she'll just make a note of, okay, I've seen that person that passed by them once, now twice, except that now there seem to be lingering, and she says lingering longer. But all of that, if you do not train for that, if you're not situationally aware,
yes,
you got a problem.
And the listening to your gut reminds me of The Gift of Fear, which is an incredible book and really hammers that point home. But I love how you see jiu-jitsu in everything, right? In your firearms, and there's so much more to the firearm conversation, extreme one way or another. They should be banned or no, they should be out there. There's so much more. And I'm glad you're leading kind of the whole charge educationally to empower people responsibly. That's wonderful. Also, you mentioned about being real estate now. I would be surprised if you don't find elements of jiu-jitsu that you use within that as well.
Yeah. So in a few ways, one of them just being the fact that what jiu-jitsu teaches you over the years is how to navigate interactions with people. You learn to communicate. And one of the cool things about jiu-jitsu is you can walk into an academy and there's a good chance you're going to have students, doctors, lawyer, teacher, fighter, computer, engineer, all the above. And right here in Utah, I can walk into a school and I know, because I know these guys. Literally, oh, that guy's a podiatrist. Oh, that guy's a neurosurgeon. Oh, that guy, is a plastic surgeon. Oh, that guy, yeah, those three guys, those are computer engineers. Oh, that guy, he's in the military. And you get this huge group of people. But what you start to do is you start to get outside of your comfort zone, outside of your normal sphere of influence, and you talk to a lot of different people. Well, in real estate, every day I'm talking to different people. One client's, a mechanic. The next client's a doctor. The next client is a business person. All sorts. So jiu-jitsu teaches you to get out of that comfort zone and to learn to communicate with others, and to learn how to appreciate others for their strengths as well, and build together. So there's that. There's the other side where just the negotiation side where, and everyone's seen it, they kind of in their mind picture the used car salesman, they picture the real estate agent that's taking them through the home, is super bubbly and trying to sell them on the home. I tell my clients, I'm not tour guide Barbie. You know what a kitchen looks like. You know what a bathroom is. You know what a backyard is. I have these details, but you've probably already also looked those as well. I'm not going to put a piece of paper in your hand. I want you to just experience the home. And if it feels like the right place and it's a good fit, let's talk more. Let's look at it more. If it just, you walk in and you wanted blue walls and they're red, okay, let's leave. I trust you guys. And that give and take, that with jiu-jitsu, really I love the way the Valente brothers talk about the definition of jiu-jitsu is not really the gentle art. It's really more the art of yielding. And I love what they're talking, yes. and what that means, what that actually means in jiu-jitsu, how you yield to then take that and then you now input your energy and your leverage and your mechanics to great effect. It's exactly the same thing. What I find is that with my clients with real estate, when they say, this is what I'm looking for, and I can respond to that, or I can take them, you know what? You already said you don't want dark cabinets. These ones are dark. Obviously you can reface and repaint them. Are you good? Do you want to keep looking? Or should we look at something else? So then when I get to the home where it's got the light cabinets and it has the view that they want, hey guys, these are the things you said you wanted. Let's push hard. If we're going to do this, let's offer aggressively. And you can use those tactics to bring them, if you will, yield to now it becomes their way. And they realize, oh yeah, he's just leading us towards where we want to go. The other side is, and something that I'm starting to do is, we always do continuing education courses to keep our licenses each year. I'm developing a real estate agent awareness and defense course, because I taught a course to a bunch of agents, a bunch of women real estate agents, because I realized early, one of the women I knew that was in my neighborhood who was an agent, one of the people in her brokerage, the woman was attacked. She went into a home and she got cornered in a room. And I said, that should never happen. And my wife's like, you've got to do something about that. You've right. got to teach this. If anyone's going to do it. I'm like, got it. Say no more. Got it. And so the course that I taught, it was just mix a women empowerment course, with a little bit of situational awareness. And what it was never walk in first to the front door. You can unlock the door, but you never have your back to your client. Right. Let them go in first. Leave the door unlocked. Leave the lights on. Keep your phone in your hand. Some basic thing is do not walk ahead into like a bedroom. If they go into a bedroom, you can stay in the doorway and keep the boundaries. The other thing too is, and something my wife talked about, why do you need to be alone? If you're going with the client and you don't feel comfortable, again, trust your gut.
That's right.
Or have someone else with you. I've told the women in my brokerage, if you feel like you ever need someone else there, you call me and I'll be there. I have no problem whether it's waiting outside or coming there with you, but just that way you have somebody with you. You should not feel uncomfortable in this kind of an environment. So there's, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah,
right, about
yeah.
The self-defense situations women and agents in general can find themselves in.
I think that's really, really needed more in that area. My friend Jim Pfeiffer and I taught a group of realtors a few years ago some of the same stuff, but I think that really needs to be widespread because, there's a lot of dangers in that occupation. For the sake of time, I want to move on to our last thing. The last thing I want to talk to you about is getting older in jiu-jitsu and how does that affect rank? I know I had a conversation not too long ago with a very seasoned black belt about this subject, and you reached out right after that and let me know, hey, there are other perspectives and opinions on that. So, and I really appreciate it. So I wanted to kind of get your take on getting older. Should older people be able to get black belts, et cetera? Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So first of all, let's be clear. I'm not getting older. I have not aged since I started training. I'm still the same age I was. I'm still in the same physical shape. I've never had an injury. All said very sarcastically. Yeah. I apparently now, according to my wife and my birth certificate, I am now in my mid-40s. I'm 44, almost 45.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I've made it this far. Yeah. Woo. Hopefully I got another 45 in me. I am grateful that I have been able to I started training as young as I did. I wish I was like my kids and started training when I was little, but it is what it is. But yeah, jiu-jitsu as you age, or starting jiu-jitsu as you're older. Here's the thing, and I take this, okay. I guess, you know what? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what I say, because there's going to be some that will agree and some will disagree. Some will be offended and some that will be cheering like, yes, okay, I agree with you. Here's the thing. In spending the amount of time with Pedro Sauer, if you do not know who he is, you need to hit pause. You need to go do some research first and listen to this from the beginning again, because a lot of more things will make sense. But Helio Gracie was a very devoted, one of the top students. Pedro Sauer is one of the top devoted students to Helio Gracie. Spent a lot of time with him. Helio obviously training into his 90s, or all the way up until he had passed away. And one of the things that Pedro Sauer talked about was jiu-jitsu was for everyone. And the fact that the way the belt system was set up, the way the rank structure, the stripes, that they were set up so that, yes, it could benefit someone who was a fighter, who did a lot of tournaments, who competed a lot. But what about the person who physically can't compete, but they're learning the technique? What about the person who can demonstrate, after 100 to 150 class hours, all of the white to blue belt curriculum, who can demonstrate those accurately, maybe not as dynamic, not as fast, but they can demonstrate those? Do they not deserve a black belt? Did Pedro say, Helio Gracie would talk about? The blue belt was not a rite of passage. It was not necessarily a sign that you were a fighter. It was the beginning. It was a sign that you had a basic understanding of the basic positions, the mechanics, the escapes, the attacks, the maintenance of the positions, a general awareness and understanding of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Now, as you progress, and again, what Pedro Sauer talked about was, if you've got the hours on the mat and you are learning and you can demonstrate that you know those, just because you're 45 and you cannot necessarily tap a 21-year-old who's at the same rank doesn't mean you don't deserve that stripe and the opportunity to test for that belt. When I tested for my black belt when was that? 2014, I think. I was like 15 and a half years of training, and I tested for my black belt. And one of the guys that I tested with was in his 60s. He had hip replacement. So when it came to demonstrating like the hip throw, Pedro knew over the years he learned how to do a hip throw. But because of his physical ailment at the time, he couldn't physically do the entire movement, but he set it up, and you could see, okay, he clearly knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of the techniques he had to go very, very slowly and do, which I think sometimes is harder than going fast, because you can kind of hide it in fast. And he earned his black belt. Now, he didn't get on the mat afterwards and start rolling with guys, because he was physically not in a position to be able to roll. And just like that, I've had plenty of students, well, I need to get in shape before I start jiu-jitsu. I said, no. Just come in. It will motivate you to want to get into shape. It'll motivate you to want to change your lifestyle if it needs to be changed. It will also help your mind. It'll help so much. It'll help you detach from life for just a little bit and really start to learn and empower yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all these ways. So the progression of belts, in many ways, is just merely a demonstration that, or a sign that you know how to demonstrate or know how to do, these particular moves, series of moves, combinations, these techniques. You understand these mechanics. And as time progresses, that you're probably teaching those as well. The black belt obviously is a pretty serious boundary that you need to be able to, when you hit that, to be able to demonstrate a lot of things and have a lot of proficiency. And Pedro Sauer, especially the way the association has really revamped, I don't know if that's the right word, but really improved upon what they're already doing and brought a lot more to the table, really puts a lot of pressure on the person testing that Helio Gracie's jiu-jitsu and his self-defense, as he promised, or made Pedro Sauer promise that his black belts would know. Why does it matter if you're 80 years old or 40, or quite frankly 30, or maybe even depending upon the person? If you get your blue belt at 16, your purple belt at 17 and a half, and so on and so forth at 25. If you can demonstrate those, but you've had the time and the experience on the mat, and the wherewithal, there's no reason that anyone shouldn't progress. Now, that's just in the progression. And I think there's a lot more to that, but I think it's very simple. If you have the time on the mat, as Pedro would talk about, if your class card shows you have the 100 class hours and you've been training and you've been developing and you're better now than you were, why shouldn't you have a stripe? Why shouldn't you now be eligible to test and demonstrate that you're ready for that belt if you're ready? Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter your athletic ability, because some people will never be fighters. Some will never compete. But rolling, though, is an important part of it. So there should be some level of live sparring. Again, it doesn't mean you have to be in the competitor circle going 100 miles an hour. But if you at least can feel comfortable using these mechanics in more of a live situation, that should be enough. And that's the way Pedro Sauer talked about it. Now, separate from that is as you get older, and not to mention, I wrote a column one time, if you're a working man training jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of guys that call single married guys. They have a job, but it's the job just enough to pay for the jiu-jitsu training. They're on the mat 4 to 5 hours a day. They're married, but they have no kids. Or they have kids, but for some reason they never see their kids. All they do is they see the academy.
Right.
And they train basically full-time hours. They're on the mat more than they actually work. For these guys, aging, now they either may hurt themselves early and they age quickly and age themselves, or have to quit jiu-jitsu because they can't do it because of the way they practice jiu-jitsu. Then there's the others that, what if I can only train 2 to 3 times a week? And if I can only train an hour or two at a time, and I show up on my lunch break or after work and I take off my work clothes and put my gi on, what that means is if you want to get better, not only do you need to show up to class, but you probably need to spend some time off the mat, stretching, exercising, eating right, but also dive into the culture, dive into, there's so many videos and movies and documentaries that have been done about Elio and the Gracie family and Pedro Sauer and others. And you start to really connect with the culture and with the family aspect and with the art, because it is a martial art if done right. If you can connect with that as you get older and as you age, you can slow down. And you can also recognize, I get it. I'm a black belt. I've got 2 stripes. I'm almost 45. I am not as powerful. So there's a buddy of mine who's a heavyweight wrestler. He was, I think he was top 10 in the U.S. NCAA heavyweight wrestler. He's a monster. He would get a hold of you. I've trained with a lot of wrestlers, and usually they're strong, but okay, you can deal with the strength and use leverage, and you can eventually get them. This guy, he's like 26. I'm like, what is going on? But it's like Henry and Huron talked about the boys' belts. Like, I totally understood what that meant. Even though at the time I remember being a brown belt. This kid was a blue belt, but he was another kid, was a wrestler, super strong, really fast, almost 20 years younger. And just the athletic ability, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'd have to use a lot more mechanics and technical ability, or I'm going to have to, try really, really hard to beat this guy. Well, if you don't have the wherewithal to have the technical ability yet because you haven't progressed to that point, then your only other option is I got to use strength. Or what if it's okay if you go, you know what, I'm going to learn from this. It's right. You either win or you learn, kind of a thing. And I'm going to tap because now I know what he does. And as Pedro says, the more you tap, and I feel like I tap more now than I tapped then, but the more you tap, you learn their tricks. And you learn the next guy's tricks and the next guy's tricks. And little by little, you may not be able to keep up with him athletically, but your jiu-jitsu knowledge and understanding, and really, and when I tell people who are, the women especially, and I tell people that are older, they're training, your goal should not be to tap everyone out. If it is, okay, good luck. You're going to be sadly, sorely disappointed. You're going to walk home sad and probably crying to yourself to sleep at night, wondering why I can't tap everyone out, because that's a tall feat. But your goal should be, as Pedro Sauer talks about, survival. If you can survive. Because let's think about it. Even if you're in your mid-40s, 50s, 60s, you go out on the street, most people have no concept of jiu-jitsu and self-defense. And if you apply even some of the basic mechanics, you're probably going to be just fine. Right. Or at least, most importantly, be able to survive. So if Pedro's thing was survival, so what I talk about with my students is, first of all, number one is survive. Survive in the position, or if you're in a dominant position, maintain the position. But survive in that position. So like if you're at the bottom of the mountain position, was working with, in fact, Bobby Lawrence this morning. We were talking about there, and he'd mentioned something I didn't really think about. I said, man, you make these micro movements, but in doing so, you take the pressure off. And I go to put my hand on the collar, next thing you know, your collar is not there, or you've redirected my hand, and now you have a frame, and I really have to work to maintain this position. Otherwise, if you bridge, I'm gone. But it's all about survival. Survival first, being comfortable in an uncomfortable position. That's something, if you're a brown belt and you haven't spent a year on the bottom of the crossbody or the mount position, you're selling yourself short. You're missing out. Spend that time to really learn and develop your survivability, because in that is where you learn. And as you're older, I'm not as fast as my 16-year-old son. So he's really strong and he's a wrestler. He's getting his takedowns. I'll tell you, his wrestling takedowns are definitely better than mine. But I can survive. I can survive, and I can slip out now without using the same strength that I would have used 20 years ago, because I could rely on strength. I didn't need it, the technique as much. So survival, number one, and then work on using the proper, what I call is a stay relaxed, a relaxed intensity. If you stay relaxed, you're not falling asleep, you're going to get choked out. But as you're surviving, stay relaxed, but with an intensity so that you're always testing the boundaries. So if you're in the bottom of the mount position, are you doing little bridges? Or you just kind of, because then you see how they react. Do they squeeze their legs here? Do they move here? Do they grab the collar here? Do they shift their weight to this side or this way? That relaxed intensity allows you to know and feel, okay, where are the weaknesses? And then you apply the proper mechanics of the technique. So once you apply those, because you've already survived, you've already worn them out, they've already tried, they've gotten frustrated, they're getting more desperate, you've already now used a relaxed intensity to now feel and literally, as Hickson talks about, this, build a sensitivity, and to be able to adapt to the variations in literally, or as he says, flowing with the go. Now it's time. Now you can be 60 and you can implement an escape or an attack without feeling like you have to go 100 miles an hour. So
totally agree.
Those are some brief thoughts on that. I mean, I feel like I could talk all day on
sure. It's a conversation that could definitely be a long and in-depth one. But suffice to say, one opinion is that the belts represent fighting ability. Mm-hmm. But when you say it like that, you have to define fighting how. Is that just rolling? Is it MMA? Is it people with the same belt rank and weight? Or is it all out? Or is it, like you were saying, more an indication of your technical ability, and you've owned the techniques, master those, and you can demonstrate them well, and it doesn't really matter how much you can roll or fight. Not like you said, that is certainly a part of it. We're not saying that that's not a part of it, but for someone that gets into it later, and the gentleman I was talking to before, and I respect all opinions, was saying, I said, what about someone who got their black belt early, but now they're 60? You certainly don't expect them to be the same. And he goes, no, you're right. But at one point, they were at this level of fighting proficiency. And then that's different if someone starts at 60, they're never going to get to where they would have if they started at 20 by those measures. And for this person, it was kind of, well, they're probably never going to make black belt. So I'm of the mind.
Yeah, that's what got me. I remember now.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the person, but I remember when I heard that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get on this stinking podcast, set this record straight, because that is an asinine opinion. And
I respect the person saying it too. I greatly respect him, but I just don't share the opinion.
But I remember not saying that person's a bad person.
Sure.
I can understand why you'd say that. If your academy is built on, and honestly, can we talk about, not really talk about, but just recognize Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Gracie Jiu Jitsu, a tournament-based, point-based curriculum or lack of curriculum and training versus self-defense-based, survival-based Gracie Jiu Jitsu. They are now two different things. Sometimes they're mixed. Sometimes they're taught at different times, but there are differences there. So we'll just, that's one thing. Yeah. But the thing that gets me fired up is this idea that someone starting when they're older, fighting, like you said, what do you constitute fighting? Now, I will say, if you're training Gracie Jiu Jitsu, if your instructor says you're training Gracie Jiu Jitsu and you've never put gloves on, or someone's never put gloves on and started swinging at you, there's a problem, because you're not getting realistic old school what Gracie Jiu Jitsu was. Definitely. If you haven't, not that you have to fight a challenge match. I don't necessarily think that necessarily has to happen, but if you haven't been challenged in a match, if I wasn't swinging at my son with gloves or just minimal gloves, and trying to and then him have to actually get around the hands, clinch,
Yes.
and I start slapping or punching. You cannot say you're training Gracie Jiu Jitsu. I will say that, and
Right.
it's something I've talked to Pedro Sauer about. Now, you can't take a 60-year-old who's never done jiu-jitsu and just start punching him in the face class 1. That would be absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
But in time, you tell them, in time, guess what? You're going to get comfortable to where you're going to be able to survive. And if I start punching, you're going to realize that these punches have 1, minimal effect. 2, you can actually either block these, stop these, or reverse the position to where my punching actually opened up to where you could do something different. Now, and then down the road, if you learn how to do De La Hiva guard and deep half guard and all these things, that's great. That's fun.
Yeah.
And it's all part of the journey. But I'll tell you what Elio Gracie told me when I got my black belt. I said, by the way, Professor, I feel really nervous now. I feel honored, but I don't think I could teach a seminar on the ins and outs and the intricate details of the X guard and the deep half. He's like, Ray Griffin, my friend. He said, Ray Griffin, my friend. I had to do his accent right. He said, that is not Elio Gracie's jiu-jitsu. Those are fun. There's nothing wrong with learning those and understanding those. But those are not Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Those are not self-defense. He said, then he later on said, do you ever see Hickson do that? Have you ever seen me do those? He said, yeah, we'll talk about the defenses and how to do some of those mechanics and stuff, but have you ever seen us actually teach those as part of our curriculum? He said, no, because that's not Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Those are fun and those are great things to learn and understand.
Yes.
But this idea that you have to fight in order to earn a belt, it's exactly that. So if you lose, you never get the belt. If you aren't in a position, let's say you can only afford training, you can't afford to fight because it's expensive. You can't ever progress. So what if you can demonstrate all the technique, let's say on the blue belt list or the purple belt list, but because I haven't fought or won a gold medal, that means I can never progress beyond that? Or if I start later on in life,
right?
Like, what point does that? So what you're basically saying is because Elio Gracie was not as good as he was probably on the mat 20 years earlier, although Pedro will tell you, even at 90 years old, you put your hand on the collar, and he would want you to go for the attacks. And he said, it was hard catching him. And if he got his hand in your collar, you're done for. But so you're telling me, though, because at 95 or 90, whatever, that he couldn't roll as well as he could have 20 years ago, that we should take his red belt off and put him back at a black belt? So this idea, and the Valente brothers talked about this too, this whole idea of fighting. Does this mean then when I turn 50 or 60, if I'm not as fast and as proficient, and let's say a purple belt or brown belt catches me because they're doing something dynamic and I'm just not quite as fast, and I leave an arm out there or a neck and they catch me, am I going to take off my black belt at that point and put on a different belt? I know there's some who would say, well, if you can't hang, then maybe you haven't earned it. Wait till those guys are 60 or 70. I'm curious what they're saying then, right? Sorry, I know I can get...
That's all right. It's kind of like the same mentality of some schools feeling like jiu-jitsu isn't for everybody. It's for only the toughest and who can come in and, weather the storm that we're going to put on you and the beat down. Mm-hmm. And they take pride in that it's not for everybody. It's more for people, for fighters. So there's some for trained to just be, fighters. And then there's Elio Gracie, Pedro Sauer, GU, that is more about survival first and more about the whole notion of jiu-jitsu is for everyone, or no matter where you 100%. Are, you can do this. Yep. So,
and let's be very clear. We are now diving into the weeds of jiu-jitsu and of a world that most people have no idea exists. Most people see Brazilian jiu-jitsu, karate, judo. Oh, it's a martial art. I'm going to learn self-defense. Most of them have no concept. And if most people just learned the white to blue belt curriculum, whether it's Pedro Sauer's and Hickson's white to blue belt curriculum, whether it's the Gracie combatives, there's so many things that are identical. Some things are, we do it at the blue belt level versus at the white belt level, but it doesn't matter. But if all they knew was that's why Henry and Huron did what they did. If that's all they knew, then like when I teach in the Army, if all they knew was level 1 and hopefully level 2 combatives, man, that is a pretty good start. And there's a pretty good chance that 90% of the situations you're going to encounter, you're going to be able to survive and be okay. So now we're really talking about things that, honestly, does it really matter? If someone's learning and progressing and they've internalized this and they can demonstrate and they're growing, the idea of progression, we shouldn't be chasing these belts or worried about these anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a marker of time. And this is the last thing I'll say. The thing that I love the most about the progression, the way Pedro Sauer set it up, the way he has made jiu-jitsu so inviting for anyone, from the fighter to the computer engineer to the doctor to the kid to the woman to anyone, is that instead of looking at a brown belt, black belt as going, oh man, those guys are tough. Yeah, they're probably pretty tough, generally speaking. At least they're pretty knowledgeable. But more importantly, you know you can go to one of them in Pedro's Association and they will be able to help you, guide you, and teach you better than a blue belt or purple belt should be able to, and really be able to explain and help you in your journey. Because as a white belt, as Pedro Sauer says, a black belt's only a white belt who never gave up. So if I'm just a white belt still that never gave up and come up with a white belt mindset, and there's a white belt on the mat, how great is it that I can now share 20-something years of knowledge and experience and tell these stories and pass this on, and that as the belt progresses, my blue belts can now go help the white belts. Because yes, what if a white belt is stronger and happens to catch a blue belt? What if a blue belt's stronger and happens to catch a brown belt? Heaven forbid catches a black belt. Cool. They both learned something. And how great is it to have a school? How great is it to be a parent and have kids that you can teach from your experience? Hey guys, when I was your age, I learned this. Hey women, when you're out and about, and you're being situation aware, look at these situations that happened. She got cut off or she got trapped in this situation. She's showing this home as a real estate agent. She's trying to, jiu-jitsu is life. And if we can see that, and if we can put it all together and realize sometimes we take ourselves too seriously, we need to take, breathe, as Hickson talks about, and learn to survive. We're going to see, and we're going to learn the tricks and the mechanics, and it's going to be okay.
Love it, man. Love it. And you certainly are putting it all together. So much respect to you and all the ways you're using jiu-jitsu and all the lives that you're impacting through it. And I love that it's such a family affair. And I appreciate your time and letting us get to know more about you and your world and your life. And much respect, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was an honor. Absolute honor to get to talk to you and spend some time. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care, my friend.
See ya.
All right. Really enjoyed that conversation with Ray. What an interesting guy he is and impacting people on a massive level. Didn't get a chance to get into his Army career, but I did wanted to acknowledge that Ray is in the Army Reserves, attached to a special operations unit in Korea, and which he goes over about once a year and gets over there for about a month every year. And locally at home, he drills with the 19th Special Forces Group, where he frequently teaches combatives, I'm told. So thank you for your service, Ray. All right. Many of you know that I am into breathing and specific types of breathing for stress management, breathing for performance, and this has been something I've delved into and been into for quite some time. I even have my program, Breathing for BJJ, that if you haven't checked out, you certainly should check it out at breathingforbjj.com. Well, I wanted to update you on my latest adventure, breathing related. For the past 6 months, I have been going through an instructor program for the Wim Hof method. And a week from today, I'll be heading over to the freezing cold mountains of Poland and completing the final leg of the program, where we'll be jumping into freezing cold rivers and lakes and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So I will update you on how it was on the next episode. So wish me luck. All right, up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Time now for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Today I'll be sharing a post that I read and really enjoyed from Dave Kovar. And this is in Dave's words. It's titled, I Got No Problems. When I was in my 20s, I supplemented my income by painting apartments and houses. I often worked with an older gentleman by the name of Doug. Doug didn't have much of a formal education, but he oozed common sense. He had a great attitude and a quick wit. I enjoyed working with him. When anyone asked how he was doing, his signature line was, "I got no problems." You see, Doug was a Vietnam vet and had seen some bad things. He used those memories as proof that, by comparison, his current situation was amazingly good. One day I was whining to him about some minor issue when he stopped me in mid-sentence and said, "Dave, quit complaining. You got no problems worth worrying about. Suck it up and enjoy the day." For years after that day, I would hear his words every now and then, but they nearly faded from my memory completely, until this happened. After a rushed lunch, I was on my way back to the office to get some closure on several projects before my trip back east. I had a ton of stuff on my mind and I was feeling a bit stressed, and quite frankly, I was extremely grumpy. As I passed a local elementary school, I noticed two kids, a boy and a girl, looking through a chain-link fence. The boy was waving to cars and being completely goofy. The girl had an ear-to-ear smile, an expression of pure bliss. You could tell that they were enjoying each other's company and having a blast. What made the moment extra special to me was that the girl was a quadriplegic. I'm not sure if I'm being politically correct here, but I have to say that seeing her, happy as can be, really put things into perspective. There she was, faced with a whole host of present and future challenges that I couldn't possibly understand, but absolutely joyous nonetheless. That gave me two instant takeaways. Number one, by comparison, I got no problems. I need to continue to nurture a sense of gratitude. And number two, who can I make smile from ear to ear? I need to reaffirm my commitment to try to live with a sense of empathy and compassion. So really love that post, and it really resonated with me, and I love the perspective, and I love being reminded of focusing on gratitude, and by comparison, man, I got no problems. So thank you, Dave Cover, for that, and I invite you to take this to heart and going through your day, your week, your month, keep this in mind, keep this story in mind, and keep this notion in mind. I got no problems. And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.GracieJiujitsuRocks.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.